The glass of wine was still unfinished when Rita Polson vanished from the town of Holbrook, Arizona, population 4,212. The winter night of 1962 swept across the plateau like a biting cold wind, carrying sand and the smell of wood smoke from the scattered log houses along Silver Creek Road. At 11:43 p.m., Rita's neighbor Lillian Moore looked out her kitchen window and saw the 40-year-old woman take off her coat, place her handbag on the table, and close the door. Rita had just finished her shift at the Silver Creek Tavern, where she worked as a night waitress, still carrying the weary look of someone who had lived alone too long. Mrs. Moore recalled the faint yellow light spilling through the window, Rita's shadow briefly cast on the curtain before it went dark. What happened in the 47 minutes that followed would haunt Holbrook for over half a century. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. In December 1962, the town of Holbrook, Arizona, was enveloped in the dry chill of winter. The small town, sparsely populated, had a main road that was nearly deserted after sunset. In a log house at the end of Silver Creek Road, Rita Polson, 40 years old, lived with her 14-year-old son, Michael. Rita worked the night shift at the Silver Creek Tavern, where she was familiar with most of the regular patrons. That evening, she finished her shift later than usual because the tavern owner needed to review the books. And as she stepped outside, the cold desert wind blew hard, dusting her heavy brown coat with fine sand. She drove home along her usual route, passing darkened storefronts, with only the dim glow of the gas station at the edge of town. Around that time, neighbors nearby saw the kitchen light in Rita's house flicker on, her silhouette moving across the curtain. Some thought they heard the door close and the sound of the heater starting, familiar noises of a quiet winter night. That was the last time anyone saw Rita Polson. The next morning, the house's lights were still on, and the radio on the shelf buzzed with static. Michael woke up to find breakfast unprepared and called for his mother. But there was no response. He searched the house, calling from the bedroom to the living room, checking the back door and circling the yard, but found no sign that his mother had left. The front door was still locked, the key hanging on its hook by the kitchen. No coat or handbag was missing. When neighbors came to help, they checked around the house, peering through windows and calling Rita's name, but the house was eerily silent. The morning wind rustled the thin curtain behind the window, heightening their unease. None of them found any trace, suggesting the woman had left the house that night. In that moment, one of them picked up the phone and dialed the Holbrook sheriff. Less than 20 minutes later, a silver-brown car from the county sheriff's department pulled up to the gate. Sheriff Harold Briggs stepped out first, followed by investigator Tammy Nash, the crime scene technician. They spoke briefly with the person who reported the incident before entering the frost-covered yard. Rita Polson's small, isolated log house backed onto an empty lot. Briggs asked everyone to stay outside the yard's perimeter to avoid disturbing evidence, then approached the front door. The lock was intact, with no signs of tampering or scratches. He tried the handle, locked from the inside. Nash circled the house, shining her flashlight along the window frames. The glass was unbroken, with only one curtain slightly ajar, the faint yellow light from the living room still spilling out. Using a spare key held by a neighbor, Briggs opened the door and stepped inside. The air carried the scent of ash and cold smoke, mixed with the faint smell of old oil from the heater. The living room was tidy, furniture undisturbed, with no signs of a struggle. Near the fireplace, a pile of cooled ash was still faintly warm, next to a small metal tray holding partially burned coals. Nash knelt to inspect it, collecting the first ash sample. On the table in the center of the room sat a glass with a trace of wine, shimmering at the bottom, beside a neatly folded handkerchief embroidered with RP in green thread. Nearby was a silver pocket watch engraved with EP, its hands frozen at 12:18. Briggs noted this in his notebook, instructing Nash to photograph the entire table. As they moved toward the center of the room, Nash noticed a dark circular stain on the carpet, about 30 centimeters in diameter. The fibers were slightly singed, the dark brown color distinct from the rest. She cut a small piece and sealed it in an evidence bag. In the kitchen, the sink was clean, the gas stove off, and dishes neatly stacked, showing no signs of use since the previous night. A thin layer of dust covered the small table by the window, with no fingerprints or signs of movement. The bedroom was orderly, the bedding undisturbed. Briggs returned to the living room, shining his flashlight along the wall's edges. No blood, no sharp objects, no scuffs or scratches. Nash photographed every angle, cataloging evidence and collecting a few stray fibers from under a chair. She listed in her notebook: ash from fireplace, burned fabric, stray fibers, silver watch. Outside, the desert wind rattled the wooden fence, making the doorframe creak faintly. Briggs stepped onto the back porch, examining the ground, hard-packed dirt with faded old shoe prints. No fresh tire tracks or unfamiliar footprints. Returning inside, he whispered to Nash that everything in the house seemed frozen from the night before. No break-in, no struggle, no disturbance, yet the woman who lived here had vanished. Nash sealed the evidence bags, labeling them with the date and time, while Briggs wrote in his preliminary report: house locked from within, no signs of forced entry, anomalies, localized burn mark, and personal items left behind. Before leaving Silver Creek, he ordered the front door sealed, preserving the scene for further investigation. In a final note at the bottom of the page, he wrote briefly, "Missing under locked conditions, cause undetermined." That afternoon, after sealing the house, Briggs returned to the office to take the first statements. Michael Polson was brought in with a town social worker. The boy sat quietly, hands clenched on his lap, answering questions briefly. Michael said his mother returned around midnight, seeming tired from her shift. She went to the kitchen, spoke to him briefly, told him to go to bed early, and closed the living room door. He heard no other sounds after that. When Briggs asked if anyone visited, or if there were noises from a car outside, Michael said no, recalling only the sound of wind whistling through the window. He confirmed the house was locked as usual, with his mother's keys on the kitchen hook. Nash recorded the entire conversation, noting Michael's calm but halting tone, occasionally repeating small details as if to affirm them. As they left the office, Briggs found it hard to determine whether the boy's calmness was normal or born of fear. That evening, they continued taking statements from residents around Silver Creek. Mrs. Jenkins, the next-door neighbor, said she was up late sewing and heard a door close around midnight, followed by a low, prolonged sound, possibly an object falling or the cellar door creaking. She saw no one leave, only the yellow light in the living room. Mr. Laramie, 2 houses down, said he woke early to prepare for herding and noticed Rita's lights still on at dawn. No one in the area saw her leave or noticed any unfamiliar vehicles that night. The next morning, when word of her disappearance spread, everyone confirmed the Polson house's lights had been on since the previous evening, until the police arrived. Briggs sent officers back to the area to search for evidence. The ground in front of the porch and backyard was covered in fine sand, ideal for capturing footprints. Nash pointed out that all the shoe prints found were small, matching Michael's size, with no larger or different prints. Along the back wooden fence, there were no signs of trampling or dragging heavy objects. The east side of the fence, where the soil was damper, showed slight indentations, but they were too vague to identify as human or animal tracks. Nash continued examining the interior, focusing on the fireplace area. When she reopened the ash guard, she detected a sharp smell of industrial oil, distinct from typical wood smoke. She took a small sample of the remaining black coals, noting separately hydrocarbon smell, possibly machine oil or artificial fuel. Briggs stood behind her, surveying the room, which remained unchanged since morning. Furniture neatly arranged, family photos unmoved on the shelf, the curtain swaying slightly in the draft. Everything was unnervingly normal. He closed his notebook and stepped outside, watching the sun tilt westward, its light highlighting smoke stains near the fireplace chimney. In his mind, the details refused to connect. A locked house, a missing woman, warm ash, and an odd oil smell. Back at the office, Briggs drafted his initial notes, listing key points. Rita was last seen the previous night. No evidence of her leaving the house, no signs of struggle or break-in, no unfamiliar shoe prints, no witnesses to strange vehicles or people. At the end of the report he wrote, "No evidence of external intrusion, small burn mark in living room insufficient to determine cause. Possible localized fire from household activity, source unclear. Industrial oil smell near fireplace, requires further testing." Nash reviewed the report, adding notes about collected samples and suggesting the ash be sent to the state lab for chemical analysis. Briggs signed off, filing the case temporarily. As he left the office, he paused, looking toward Silver Creek Road, where the lone streetlight flickered on in the evening haze. He still couldn't fathom how someone could vanish completely from a locked house, leaving everything as if they'd stepped away for just a moment. 2 days after collecting samples and documenting the scene, Tammy Nash began a closer analysis of the ash from the fireplace and the singed carpet fragment. The department's makeshift lab had only basic equipment, so she used a solvent-based qualitative method to separate the sample. When dripping ether onto the finely ground ash, Nash noticed a reaction producing a distinct hydrocarbon smell, unlike wood smoke. She noted, "Preliminary results, evidence of artificial fuel, likely industrial oil or gasoline." The burned fabric from the carpet showed the same reaction, supporting the theory that the dark stain wasn't from a household fire, but from a flammable substance poured directly. She reported this to Briggs, who immediately visited the lab to review the findings. Hearing Nash's explanation, he mused, "If it's artificial fuel, someone intentionally started a fire, but why in a locked house?" Briggs asked her to further examine related items, particularly metal objects in the living room and hallway. The next morning, he returned to the Polson house for another sweep, this time with permission from Rita's family. Accompanying them was Johnny Polson, cousin of Rita's ex-husband Edward, who volunteered to help clean up after the police finished. Johnny, about 40, sturdy and quick-spoken, joined Briggs and Nash in the living room. While they surveyed, Johnny entered Michael's bedroom, where the closet hadn't been checked. Moments later, he emerged holding a heavy flat-headed iron bar, about 40 centimeters long, typically used for tire changes. "Found this in the kid's closet," Johnny said, placing it on the table. Briggs examined it, instructing Nash to log it. She measured and photographed it, noting old rust on the head but a cleaner, less dusty handle. Briggs asked Michael, present with a social worker, "Do you know this?" The boy shook his head, saying he'd never seen it. When asked if anyone else visited the house, Michael said only his mother, and occasionally Johnny came by. Briggs made no conclusions but noted in the report, "Tire iron origin unclear, needs fingerprint analysis." Nash collected fingerprints and dusted the bar, but preliminary results were inconclusive. Back at the office, they reviewed the evidence. The ash and burned fabric showed traces of artificial fuel. The iron bar was the only metal object found. Rita vanished without signs of a struggle, and Michael was the only person present. Briggs wrote in his summary, "Possibility of a domestic incident not ruled out. Need to examine behavior of minor." Yet he remained puzzled by the absence of spreading burns, blood, or structural damage, just a small burned area. Nash reiterated that the oddest detail was the oil smell near the fireplace, with ash containing metal particles and burned fibers unlike wood ash. Briggs requested the samples be sent to the state lab for precise oil identification, but while awaiting results, he had to make a preliminary assessment. In the next morning's internal meeting, he told the team, "No evidence of outside intrusion, locked house scenario. Metal object found in the child's room, unexplained. Possible use of artificial fuel." Some agreed, others felt the evidence was insufficient to conclude. Briggs didn't comment further, only ordering Michael's monitoring while awaiting lab results. That evening, he reviewed the divorce file between Rita and Edward Polson, her ex-husband now living in Flagstaff. Though they'd been separated for over a year, Briggs noted Edward's name for follow-up. Closing his notebook, he looked out the office window at the sunset blanketing the town. The case was growing complex, but for now, the focus remained on the locked house and the boy who last saw Rita alive. In that day's report conclusion, Briggs wrote briefly, "Hydrocarbon traces in ash sample, suspected use of flammable substance. Unidentified metal object recovered. Subject Michael Polson requires further monitoring, possible withholding of information or undisclosed actions." The next day, Michael was brought to the Holbrook County Sheriff's Department for an official statement. The interrogation room was small, with gray-painted walls containing only a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a single round light bulb hanging low. Briggs sat across from Michael, while Tammy Nash observed from behind, noting every detail. The boy wore a dark shirt, his wrists still slightly stained from gripping the iron door handle upon entering. Briggs went over the events of the night Rita disappeared. Michael repeated his earlier statement almost verbatim. His mother came home late, said a few brief words, then went to her room, and he went to bed shortly after. Briggs shifted his approach, pressing for exact times, his mother's tone, and her actions. Michael answered slowly, hesitantly, sometimes repeating, "I don't remember clearly." When asked about unusual noises, voices, or objects falling, he mentioned only maybe the wind or the floorboards creaking. His statement offered no new details. Briggs remained skeptical, ordering a check of the clothes Michael wore that first night. The results showed no blood, no burn marks, or foreign substances. This did little to ease Briggs' suspicions. In his preliminary report he wrote, "Minor subject, low emotional display, tendency to evade questions, not actively cooperative, requires further monitoring." Citing experience from past cases, he suggested that an overly calm demeanor might conceal something. Nash reviewed the report and disagreed. She noted privately, no objective evidence to incriminate. Silent behavior may stem from fear or psychological shock. After the interrogation, she met Briggs in the hallway, suggesting they broaden the investigation rather than focus on the boy. She argued that the samples indicated artificial fuel, implying an adult with knowledge or access to such materials, not a child. Briggs responded curtly that it would be considered, but maintained his focus. He believed the case still centered on the locked house and Michael as the last person to see Rita alive. In a brief afternoon meeting, he presented the progress to his superiors, no signs of intrusion, a tire iron found in Michael's room, ash samples containing artificial fuel, and the miner's uncooperative demeanor. Some team members agreed that Michael needed further scrutiny. Nash sat quietly, offering no comment, but after the meeting, she wrote in her work log, "Wrong investigative direction, no legal basis for this hypothesis." While awaiting the state lab's oil analysis results, Briggs authorized short-term monitoring of Michael at a juvenile center for behavioral assessment. The boy didn't resist, asking only, "When can I go home?" Nash, the only one to respond, said, "When things become clear." In the day's final report, Briggs reinforced his view, writing that the subject appears indifferent to his mother's disappearance, showing no concern, with signs of deception. Nash signed off on the technical section, but disagreed with the conclusion. She submitted an internal memo suggesting alternative leads, including reviewing Rita's recent finances and relationships. The proposal was filed, but not pursued. 3 days later, Briggs submitted a summary to his superiors, stating that the case's focus currently lies on the minor with abnormal behavior. From then on, the Holbrook Sheriff's Department's official investigation direction was set. While Briggs maintained his hypothesis about Michael's behavior, the Holbrook County Sheriff's Department simultaneously launched an expanded search outside the Silver Creek residential area. The effort involved over 40 people, including police, firefighters, and volunteers from the town council. The search area was divided into 3 main zones: the open land around the Polson house, the sparse forest stretching west, and the winding Silver Creek River about a mile away. On the first morning, Briggs personally led the team, while Nash oversaw the area near the back fence. She carried a topographic map, marking each searched spot. The dry ground, scattered with sand and gravel, held old footprints mixed with fresh ones from villagers since Rita's disappearance. The backyard showed slight soil indentations, but not deep enough to suggest burial. Nash measured distances from the back door to the fence, noting details in her log, and requested the forensic team to examine the damp soil near the fence. Using probes, they found fine ash mixed with dirt and small burned fabric scraps, thick like women's clothing material. The samples were collected for testing. In the northeast, a second team searched the dirt road leading to the forest. They moved in a line, 10 paces apart, probing the ground with sticks. Occasionally, someone picked up stray items, a cigarette butt, a rusty can, a glass shard, but nothing tied to the disappearance. Along the forest edge, Nash spotted faint, parallel tire tracks on the dry ground, but their shape was unclear. She measured and photographed them, noting, parallel tire tracks, time of formation undetermined. A local resident mentioned that trucks had hauled timber there weeks earlier, making it impossible to confirm if the tracks were recent. Briggs inspected them, touched the ground, and shook his head. He wrote, "Tire tracks of undetermined age, not proven relevant." That afternoon, the search shifted south to where Silver Creek flowed through lowlands. The river, shallow in winter, was mostly thick mud in parts. Officers waded in, using rakes and nets along both banks. After hours, they found only bits of ash floating downstream and a faint oil sheen on the water near the sandy bank. Nash collected a water sample, adding it to the evidence list. As dusk fell, Briggs halted the day's efforts. He stood on the bank, watching flashlight beams flicker along the river, then returned to his car, his face pensive. For the next 6 days, the search continued. Teams rotated, covering a 3-mile radius around the Polson house. Metal detectors were used, and tracking dogs were brought in from Prescott. The dogs sniffed around the fence, cellar and yard, but showed no unusual reactions. Results remained negative. Local media began reporting, calling it the strange Silver Creek disappearance. Town opinions split. Some believed Rita left voluntarily. Others suspected foul play within the family. Briggs avoided the press, stating only that all possibilities are being considered. Nash, meanwhile, re-examined the collected soil and ash samples. Under a microscope, she noticed tiny metal particles in the ash, possibly contaminants from burned items, not wood. She sent the samples to the state lab for component analysis. By the 9th day, the volunteer group was exhausted. They rescanned the western forest, where low trees and cactus thickets grew. More small burned fabric scraps were found, but they were too small to identify. Nash logged them, feeling the search was yielding diminishing returns. On the afternoon of the 10th day, Briggs gathered the team in the Polson backyard for a debrief. The final report noted, no body found, no personal items, no signs of a body being moved or unfamiliar vehicles. The only evidence collected outside the house was ash, burned fabric scraps, and undated tire tracks. Briggs read the points, closed his notebook, and said evenly, "No new findings. Suspend expanded search." The order was issued that afternoon. As the team packed up, desert wind blew, dusting over footprints around the house. Nash looked at the sealed door, where dim light reflected off the curtain, her mind stuck on an unanswered question. If Rita didn't leave, where was she? After the external search ended without results, Tammy Nash returned to the scene, feeling something remained unresolved. She requested Briggs' permission to re-examine the house's cellar, which had only been briefly inspected due to dim lighting and a narrow floor. Briggs approved, assigning her 2 technicians. That morning, they brought optical lights, a measuring tape, a camera, and clean evidence containers. The cellar door, in the kitchen corner, led to narrow wooden steps and a damp, musty smell. Opening the hatch, a cold draft carried the faint, lingering scent of old smoke. Nash turned on the light, scanning the rough cement walls. The eastern wall was streaked with uneven soot marks. The floor darkened in patches, with faint oil streaks shimmering. Kneeling, Nash touched the floor. Fine dust stuck to her fingertips, resembling ash under the light. Along the cellar's edge, a thin layer of powder mixed with burned fabric scraps and small metal fragments. Nash called for her colleagues to photograph the scene, number the locations, and begin collecting samples per protocol. Ash and dust were scooped into sealed glass bags with a small steel spoon. Burned fabric was separated with medical tweezers, labeled HMA and HMB. She also collected 3 small rusted metal fragments, possibly broken from a tool or container. When the light swept the low ceiling, Nash noticed fan-shaped soot patterns, as if smoke had once billowed from a single point and dispersed. Standing, she aimed the light at the floor's center, a cracked cement patch with denser black ash embedded. Using a thin knife, she pried out a small amount, placing it in a test tube. Briggs, watching from the cellar entrance, called down, "Anything new?" Nash replied briefly, "Thicker smoke than I thought, and this floor saw high heat." After nearly 2 hours, they finished collecting, sealed the samples, and left the cellar. The door was closed and taped with a warning to preserve the scene. Back at the office, Nash organized the samples and wrote a detailed description. In her initial remarks, she noted, "Cellar shows signs of localized burning. Fine ash covers surfaces, with burned fabric and metal fragments. Need to determine if ash contains biological material." The samples were sent to the Arizona State Lab in Flagstaff for analysis. Due to 1962's limited technology, results returned after nearly 2 weeks with basic findings. Ash contained carbon, lime, clay dust, and traces of light machine oil. No protein or organic tissue detected. The report concluded, no biological components identified, insufficient data to confirm criminal activity. Briggs read the results, folded the report, and stayed silent. He knew this meant the investigation wouldn't progress further. Nash, sitting across, flipped through the cellar photos: smoke-stained walls, darkened floor, fine ash, signs of a controlled fire extinguished, but no concrete evidence. She added a final note to her internal report. Scene may indicate a controlled burn, cannot rule out material disposal. Briggs only said the information would be filed with the main case. That afternoon, he returned to the house one last time to ensure it was sealed, standing before the closed cellar door, looking at the thin dust underfoot. No sounds came, except the wind through the door's cracks. As he left, he locked the door, carrying the slim file of under 10 pages. That evening's report to the county office concluded, typed briefly, insufficient evidence to confirm criminal activity. 2 months after Rita Polson's disappearance, the case file grew thicker but lacked breakthroughs. Samples from the house, especially ash and burned fabric, showed no biological origin. The state lab's report confirmed no blood or human tissue, stalling all criminal theories. In internal meetings, Briggs reviewed the investigation. A locked house, no intrusion, no struggle, no body, and no evidence Rita left Holbrook. Witnesses agreed no strangers appeared that night. All clues pointed to an unexplained disappearance. With no basis to expand, Briggs drafted a final summary for the Navajo County office. In the final report, typed on yellow paper, he wrote, "Insufficient data to confirm criminal activity. Conclusion, Rita Polson missing. Cause undetermined." The words were typed decisively, closing 2 months of relentless but fruitless investigation. Meanwhile, Michael Polson remained at the County Juvenile Center. Though not charged, he was required to undergo behavioral and psychological monitoring. Briggs cited instability, post-trauma. But his suspicion of the boy lingered. Nash, handling technical aspects, repeatedly requested Michael's release, but it was denied. In town, rumors spread. Some believed Rita left due to debts or family conflicts. Others suspected murder but lacked evidence. Local media stopped reporting after weeks without progress, and public interest waned. One February morning, Briggs and Nash returned to the house for a final ceiling check. The house was silent, dust coating the railings and steps. Briggs opened the door, walked through, confirmed no disturbances, and locked it again. All evidence, ash, fabric, metal fragments, and scene photos was gathered at the office, stored in a metal box labeled SC-1262, sealed with the date and investigator signatures. Nash placed it in the Navajo County Evidence Storage, fourth shelf from the bottom, third row on the left, for unresolved but inactive cases. On the main file's cover, Polson, Rita, missing person was typed, marked in red, as temporarily closed. As Briggs filed the papers, he glanced out the office window. Holbrook's sky was gray, desert wind blowing sand along the old brick buildings. He knew the case would soon fade among hundreds of unresolved files. For him, it was an unsatisfactory outcome, but no other options remained within the evidence's limits. The next day, the Rita Polson case was officially moved to suspended status, awaiting new information. Michael left the center weeks later, living with relatives elsewhere. Edward Polson, Rita's ex-husband, sold the old property and moved to Flagstaff, opening a small mechanic shop. In Nash's final internal report, she wrote briefly, "Polson case cause undetermined. No criminal evidence, requires long-term evidence storage." Those words, along with the SC-1262 label on the metal box, marked the end of the initial investigation, a mystery closed with the heavy silence of those involved. After the Rita Polson file was archived, time passed quietly without mention. From 1963, the Silver Creek disappearance became a vague tale in the small town, occasionally recalled on cafe porches by newcomers. The Navajo County Sheriff's Department saw staff changes, and old files were pushed to lower shelves, stacked by year. The SC-1262 evidence box sat on the third shelf, gathering dust through seasons of rain and wind. No one opened it. Typed reports yellowed, and Nash's handwritten notes faded, their slanted script now barely legible. In the inventory log, the Polson file was marked permanent storage, no longer under review. Briggs retired in the late 1970s, Nash transferred to Flagstaff's investigation office. Those directly involved left the field, and with them, Rita's memory faded. Occasionally, at old case reviews, veteran officers mentioned the woman who vanished from a locked house. They agreed the detail was never adequately explained. In a 1982 conversation, retired Sheriff Briggs, asked about the Polson case by a reporter, said only, "No evidence to charge anyone," then fell silent. Some former subordinates believed the investigation was flawed from the start. A few whispered that Edward Polson, Rita's ex-husband, was known for a temper and rumored violence, but no one dared conclude without evidence. Such suspicions were never officially documented. In the 1990s, during an archive reorganization, a clerk glanced at the SC-1262 box, noting only "Missing Person Case, 1962, no updates." They didn't open it, just dusted it and returned it to its place. Sometimes, the archive manager saw the Polson Rita label on the box's edge but didn't recall who she was. The case sank into oblivion. Over 5 decades, no new complaints or reinvestigation requests were filed. Michael Polson left the state, starting a new life, cutting ties with the town. Edward stayed in Flagstaff, running his small shop, rarely appearing publicly. Holbrook changed. Silver Creek Road was paved. The Silver Creek Tavern long closed, and the Polson property became overgrown with brush. By the early 21st century, advances in DNA analysis prompted reviews of old Arizona cases, but the program focused on cases with clear biological samples. Files like Polson's, with no human tissue results, were low priority. Everything seemed destined to remain there until 2014. That year, the Arizona Attorney General's office launched the Arizona Cold Case Initiative, reviewing unresolved cases from the 1950s to 1980s, emphasizing long-stored evidence. When Navajo County's archive was checked, staff found over 200 suspended files, including a small metal box with a faded label, SC-1262, Polson R. It was logged, and sent to the state's Central Archive. Those handling it didn't know they held evidence from a case that shook Holbrook half a century earlier. But its silent existence, with an unbroken seal, marked SC-1262 as eligible for reanalysis. That note, added to the program's digital inventory, became the starting point for bringing Rita Polson's disappearance back into the light after over 50 years in the shadows of storage. In March 2014, while compiling data for the Arizona Cold Case Initiative, Detective Claire Polson was tasked with reviewing unresolved missing persons cases in Navajo County. She was a young officer recently transferred from Phoenix, specializing in retrieving stored evidence and updating electronic records. While browsing a digitized catalog of old yellowed index cards, Claire paused at a name that caught her attention. Polson, Rita, missing 1962. The surname Polson was familiar, and after a few minutes of research, she confirmed Rita was her aunt, someone her family only referred to as a person who went away. In faint childhood memories, Claire recalled her grandmother mentioning that Rita's disappearance was never resolved, but the family rarely spoke of it. A mix of curiosity and duty prompted her to open the electronic case file, reading each page scanned from the original. Sheriff Harold Briggs' report was brief, spanning just a few pages, summarizing the search process without concluding a cause. However, as she scrolled to the appendix, Claire noticed a handwritten note by forensic investigator Tammy Nash, slanted text, ink nearly faded. Gasoline smell around fireplace. Tire iron found by relative. Next to it was a red check mark and the initials, TN. She paused, reading it repeatedly, feeling as if she'd stumbled upon a forgotten clue. In Briggs' final report, this detail was omitted, mentioning only a metal object of unknown origin. Claire jotted down the note and evidence code SC-1262 in her personal notebook, then checked if the evidence box was still in storage. The new inventory system had assigned QR codes to old evidence, and surprisingly, box SC-1262 was listed as sealed intact. The last status update, from 1963, had no further notes. She contacted the Navajo County Archives to request an in-person review. 3 days later, Claire arrived at the storage facility, a low, gray concrete building on the outskirts of town. The manager brought out an old metal box, its paper label worn but legible, ESC-1262, Polson, R., with Sheriff Harold Briggs' signature below. The box, sealed with 2 rusted lead wires, was intact. Claire photographed it, wrote a report, and contacted the Arizona State Forensics Lab to request permission to open the box and re-examine its contents using modern scientific methods. In her request, she stated, "Evidence stored for over 50 years, potentially containing organic material not fully degraded. Proposed DNA testing, combustion compound analysis, and trace metal examination." The State Forensics Lab responded after 2 weeks, confirming the case qualified for review under the Cold Case Initiative. They requested the evidence be sent to the Phoenix Evaluation Center for initial assessment before forwarding samples for advanced analysis to the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania lab, home to the most advanced DNA and combustion compound analysis equipment at the time. Claire prepared a transfer report, personally overseeing the resealing of the box for transport. During her review, she closely studied the case documents. A 1962 memo indicated Nash suspected industrial oil or gasoline was used in the house, but the technology of the time couldn't identify the fuel type. The lab report only noted no biological tissue detected. This limitation led to the case being quickly closed. Claire added a comment to her electronic report. Recommend re-examining all evidence, as current technology can detect DNA or burned organic traces at levels 1/10,000th lower than the 1960s threshold. During a Cold Case Initiative team meeting, she presented the Polson case as a prime example of an underexplored file. Some older colleagues vaguely recalled the Silver Creek missing woman case, but knew no details. Upon hearing about the gasoline smell and the tire iron found by a relative, they agreed the case warranted reanalysis. Weeks later, an email from Harrisburg confirmed that sample SC-1262 had arrived in good condition, with potential for physical data recovery. That same day, Claire updated the state's cold case system, case ID 62-198 reopened for forensic review. Beside the note, she typed a few personal words, not part of the official record. Aunt Rita, someone's finally looking again. In her quiet office, the computer screen's glow reflected on her face. 52 years after the case was forgotten, Rita Polson's name reappeared on the active investigation list, marking the moment a seemingly closed case was reopened. Not with suspicion, but with the persistence of a new generation armed with science and old records. The first report from the Harrisburg lab arrived in early June 2014, just weeks after the SC-1262 evidence box was opened and reprocessed. The document, over 20 pages long, included microscopic images of ash samples, fabric fragments, and metal residue. Claire Polson received the sealed envelope from the Arizona State Office that morning, just after a routine meeting. From the first lines, she realized this was no longer a simple missing persons case, as it had been recorded half a century earlier. The report stated, ash sample SC-1262A contains trace amounts of calcium, phosphorus, and carbon in the form of hydroxyapatite, the basic structural component of human bone. In the notes, the forensic technician added that infrared spectroscopy and mass spectrometry confirmed the presence of biological minerals, impossible in wood ash or construction materials. Additionally, burned fabric fibers mixed in the ash contained keratin protein, remnants of burned skin or hair. This was the first evidence confirming human remains in the ash collected from the Polson house basement in 1962. Claire read slowly, noting each detail in pencil. She knew what this meant. The missing persons case had become a homicide. The next page detailed mitochondrial DNA analysis. The lab extracted DNA from the ash and compared it to a sample from Crystal Phelps, Rita's surviving sister, who volunteered a reference sample when she learned the case was reopened. The match was 99.97%, sufficient to confirm maternal lineage. The final line of the results was concise. The remains belonged to a female individual maternally related to Crystal Phelps. Identification, Rita Polson. Status, deceased. Claire sat silently for a moment, looking out her office window where sunlight slanted through eucalyptus trees. In her hands, the slim report held enough weight to redefine the entire case. She printed 3 copies, sending one to the State Investigative Agency and one to the Navajo County office where the original file was stored. That afternoon, she held a virtual meeting with Harrisburg's forensic team for a detailed briefing. The experts described the sample extraction process. Ash was soaked in EDTA solution to release minerals, then processed in a high-speed centrifuge to isolate particles under 100 microns, which were analyzed via spectroscopy to identify calcium, phosphorus, sodium, and magnesium. The calcium to phosphorus ratio was 2:1, closely matching adult human bone structure. The report concluded, cannot be mistaken for wood ash or burned cement. Notably, the ash preserved DNA despite over half a century, thanks to early sealing in a dry environment, shielded from light or high temperatures post-collection. In the general assessment, the conclusion was bolded, evidence of homicide confirmed. Those few words marked a turning point. With this, Rita Polson's case was no longer listed as missing without cause. Claire immediately drafted a report to the Cold Case Initiative Director, attaching copies of all forensic findings. The report stated, ash from the 1962 scene contains human bone components, with DNA confirming the victim's identity. Recommend transferring the case to criminal investigation status. When asked how she felt, Claire replied only, we lost 52 years to get data we should have had from the start. She knew the truth couldn't undo the past, but it laid a foundation for justice. That same day, Navajo County received official notification from the state. Reclassification approved, case type updated to homicide. This update automatically appeared in the database, marking the first status change since the case was closed in 1963. In Holbrook, an administrative clerk printed a new case card, switching its color code from yellow to red, indicating an active investigation. Copies of the forensic results were filed with magnified ash images, spectroscopy charts, and a map of the collection site. Every detail was meticulously numbered, more carefully than any other case from that era. When finished, Claire removed her glasses and leaned back in her chair. She recalled Nash's faded note on old paper, gasoline smell around fireplace. After over half a century, that note was proven correct. The ash wasn't from wood, it was human. The final evidence brought Rita Polson back from history's void, not as a missing person, but as the victim of a forgotten murder. Immediately after the ash analysis was confirmed, Claire Polson sent a follow-up request to the Harrisburg lab to expand testing on the remaining evidence in Box SC-1262. Her goal was to determine if DNA or combustion-related compounds could be found on the metal items collected in 1962. Most notable was the tire iron submitted by a relative, Johnny Polson. The original report noted it had no blood, no irregularities, but with modern technology, Claire believed trace cellular material might still exist. The sample was sent with additional ash for a second analysis round, undergoing enzymatic DNA extraction and nanofiltration. After nearly 6 weeks, the results returned. The tire iron's handle retained male DNA, a complete match to Edward Polson, the victim's ex-husband. The lab confirmed the Y-Aster sequence matched 99.9% with Edward's sample from a 2004 tax filing. In the conclusion, the forensic specialist noted, the contact trace is biological, likely left during use, not from storage. This was the first evidence directly linking Edward to the case's evidence. Claire paused long at that section. For 52 years, suspicion had pointed to the 14-year-old son. Now physical evidence pointed squarely at the father who left Holbrook after the disappearance. She immediately accessed Edward's file in the state database, reviewing his remaining civil records. The file showed he was born in 1921, worked as a mechanic, and after divorcing Rita, opened a small auto shop in Flagstaff, over 100 miles from Holbrook. The next clue came from comparing oil found at the scene with oil used in Edward's shop. In the old ash, Harrisburg identified long-chain hydrocarbon compounds matching industrial lubricant oil used in 1960s truck engines, distinct from household oil or heating fuel. Cross-referencing old business tax records, Claire found Edward had registered purchases of L-28 oil from Prescott Lubricants in 1962. The lab analyzed archived samples from the state's Industrial Museum and confirmed the oil in the ash matched L-28's formula. The conclusion was brief. Source of origin consistent with mechanical lubricant, identical to compound registered by Edward Polson, 1962. This chemical evidence strongly supported the hypothesis that someone using that oil was at the scene. Claire drafted an interim report to Navajo County listing 2 new findings: 1, the tire iron bore Edward Polson's DNA. 2, the machine oil at the scene matched the product from Edward's shop. She knew that to establish motive, she needed to understand their relationship at the time of the incident. Reviewing old court records, Claire found the divorce decree between Rita and Edward, signed on August 18, 1962, just 4 months before her disappearance. The decree showed Rita won the case, gaining custody of their child, ownership of the Silver Creek house, and half of Edward's assets, including savings and shop profits. Edward was also ordered to pay monthly alimony for 2 years. The court file included Rita's statement, noting Edward's violent behavior and financial threats. Claire read each line carefully, noting the cautious but fearful tone. Below, Edward signed, acknowledging irreconcilable differences. The file also contained his brief appeal 2 months later, requesting a review of the asset division, which was denied. Comparing timelines, Claire realized Rita's disappearance occurred less than 4 months after the final court ruling. A financial motive emerged. Edward lost most of his assets and faced ongoing payments. Meanwhile, his shop was struggling, with revenue declining after losing a major transport contract. She noted in her memo, high likelihood of personal animosity tied to post-divorce asset division. The crime may have been committed to conceal or retaliate. The report's latter section included a criminal psychology analysis from the advisory team. Middle-aged men losing ownership and patriarchal roles often exhibit extreme control behaviors, especially in financial conflicts. Social services records showed Edward had a history of behavioral issues and a workplace altercation warning. Piecing together the evidence, the sequence became clear. A woman who won a divorce case vanished. At her home, unusual burn marks, industrial machine oil, and a tool with her ex-husband's DNA were found. Claire submitted a 12-page summary to the Arizona Attorney General's office, concluding, scientific evidence establishes Edward Polson's direct connection to the scene. Motive identified financial conflict and personal animosity post-divorce. Under her signature, she quoted the Harrisburg report, evidence of homicide confirmed. With those words, the truth buried since 1962 began to take shape through the cold language of science: ash, oil, metal, and DNA. Elements that don't lie, sufficient to place the ex-husband at the center of the case. After obtaining the forensic evidence results, Claire Polson began the witness verification phase, a critical step to strengthen the case and establish Edward Polson's connection to the crime scene. She reviewed the list of people living near Silver Creek in 1962, using tax records and old address books. Most had moved away or passed on, but a few names appeared among Holbrook's long-term residents. One was Larry Lee, a former neighbor who lived next to the Polson house. In his early 20s at the time, he still resided in Holbrook. Claire visited him one August afternoon at his small home along the old road, its wooden walls weathered by desert winds. After a brief introduction and showing her badge, she was invited into his living room, where black and white photos adorned the walls. When Claire mentioned Rita Polson, Lee's eyes grew somber. "I remember that night," he said slowly. "I was fixing a window around midnight when I saw light coming from her basement. Not normal light, it flickered, like fire or a handheld lamp." Claire asked him to elaborate. Lee said the light lasted about 5 minutes before going out. He assumed Rita was fixing something and didn't think much of it. He was never asked about this detail during the 1962 interviews, as police only inquired if he saw anyone entering or leaving the house. "I remember clearly," Lee added. "The light came from the basement window, on the east side of the house." Claire meticulously recorded his statement and had him sign it. Lee's testimony became the first to corroborate the theory of a localized fire in the basement, where the ash-containing human bone was found. Next, Claire sought out Robert Atkins, a retired mechanic who worked at Edward's Flagstaff shop in the early 1960s. Tax records listed him as an employee in 1962. When contacted, Atkins agreed to meet in Prescott, where he now lived. During their conversation, he recalled that early one December morning that year, Edward arrived at the shop before 6 a.m. He drove his truck in, looking tired and quiet, Atkins said. The odd thing was, he spent the whole morning washing it, scrubbing the bed thoroughly. I asked what was wrong, and he just said, "Spilled oil. Gotta clean it." When he heard days later that Edward's ex-wife had gone missing, Atkins felt uneasy but wasn't questioned at the time. He described to Claire the image of Edward scrubbing the truck in the cold, his jacket stained with oil, water splashing around the lot. "I thought something was off, but who was I to question the boss back then?" Claire had him sign his statement and gathered additional data from the shop's records. A 1962 inventory log noted an entry for L28 oil in the month Rita vanished, matching the oil found in the ash samples. After securing these two key testimonies, Claire turned to Johnny Polson, the cousin who found the tire iron in Michael's room. Still alive in Tucson at 80, frail but sharp-minded, Johnny was visited by Claire and a state investigator. When asked about finding the tire iron, his response differed starkly from the 1962 report. He said he couldn't recall exactly where he found it, only that he saw it in the house and gave it to Briggs. Claire showed him the original 1962 record, with his signature, stating it was found in Michael's bedroom closet. Johnny stared at the paper, then shook his head slightly. Maybe the police wrote it wrong. When Claire mentioned the tire iron bore Edward's DNA, he fell silent. His posture stiffened, eyes fixed on his trembling hands. After a pause, he said, "I didn't want trouble. Back then, Ed asked me to help clean the house, said he was just picking up some leftover stuff. I didn't know anything else." Claire recorded the entire session and obtained his signature. This statement, compared to his 1962 testimony, revealed clear inconsistencies, evidence suggesting Johnny may have concealed or altered the scene when handing over the item. In her summary report, Claire listed 3 new witness sources. One, Larry Lee, confirmed seeing strange light in Rita's basement the night of the incident. 2, Robert Atkins verified Edward's unusual truck washing the next morning. 3, Johnny Polson's revised testimony suggested possible involvement in cleaning up the scene. Concurrently, the State Forensics Lab completed additional results, confirming the L-28 oil in the ash perfectly matched samples from Edward's shop inventory. The chain of physical evidence, DNA on the tire iron, matching oil compounds, and witness testimonies formed a cohesive system pointing to Edward Polson's presence at Rita's house the night she was killed. In late September 2015, Claire drafted a prosecution proposal for the Arizona Attorney General's office, attaching all forensic reports, testimonies, and physical evidence. In the recommendation, she wrote, based on DNA results, matching compounds and new witness testimonies, there is sufficient legal basis to request an arrest warrant for Edward Polson on charges of first-degree murder. On the final page, she signed and stamped, Cold Case Unit, reopened 2015. As the proposal was submitted, it marked exactly 53 years since Rita Polson vanished from Holbrook. A case once buried in dusty archives now had enough evidence and witnesses to move to formal prosecution. In September 2015, after the arrest warrant was approved by the Navajo County Court, a task force from the Arizona Bureau of Investigation headed to Prescott Valley, where Edward Polson, now 81, lived in a small retirement community. Before the arrest, Claire Polson, the county sheriff, and the lead prosecutor met urgently to finalize procedures. All recognized the case's symbolic weight, tied to a file forgotten for over half a century. The search warrant included requests for DNA samples, personal documents, and items potentially linked to the old auto shop. At 7 a.m., with Prescott Valley still shrouded in fog, the first patrol car stopped at the narrow alley where Edward's gray brick house sat behind low pines. He was found in the yard watering plants, thin and white-haired. When 2 officers approached, one read the arrest warrant aloud. Edward stood still for a moment, then nodded without resistance. In a hoarse voice, he asked only, "The old case?" Police instructed him to remain silent until his lawyer arrived. He was handcuffed per protocol and taken to the Prescott Valley station. At the station, Edward underwent identity verification. Records showed he owned a small auto shop until 1988, when it closed. He had no criminal record, only minor administrative violations. During DNA sampling, he showed no resistance, sitting quietly as technicians collected saliva and fingerprints. The entire process was recorded per state standards. Meanwhile, the investigation team searched his home, seizing old documents, oil purchase invoices, and accounting ledgers from 1960, 1963. These were sealed and sent to forensics. When the DNA sample was analyzed, results returned within 12 hours. The report stated, the reference sample from Edward Polson perfectly matches the male DNA on the SC-1260-2 tire iron evidence. Probability of random match, 1 in 18 billion. The brief statement carried undeniable weight. DNA evidence confirmed Edward handled the item found at Rita's crime scene. The report was sent to Claire Polson. She read it 3 times, then called the district prosecutor to confirm the analysis was complete. That afternoon, the prosecutor formally signed the indictment under State of Arizona v. Edward Polson, charging first-degree murder under Arizona Revised Statutes 13-11-05. News of the arrest spread internally before going public. It was the first time in the Arizona Cold Case Initiative's history that a case over half a century old was prosecuted based on DNA and metal evidence. Claire, as the case's discoverer and lead investigator, was designated the liaison for the prosecution. In an internal report to the program director, she wrote, "The arrest warrant was executed safely. The suspect cooperated without resistance. DNA sample confirms an absolute match with the evidence." The case has moved to the criminal prosecution phase. In the holding cell, Edward Polson remained mostly silent. When asked if he wanted to say anything before court, he said only, "I've lived too long to forget everything." His voice was low, hard to discern as calm or weary. Police recorded his words verbatim without comment. That day, a public defender was assigned, and a preliminary hearing was scheduled. Local media soon published a brief story, 81-year-old suspect arrested in 1962, missing person case, Polson case reopened. The headline appeared on the front page of the Arizona Daily Sun, drawing attention in Holbrook. Many who lived through that era were stunned to hear the old case was still under investigation. In the Navajo County office, where the SC-1262 evidence box once sat untouched, a new case file copy now appeared. On its cover, bold red text read, "Homicide. Case reopened, September 2015. Below was Claire Polson's signature, marking the official milestone after over 50 years as an unresolved missing persons case. Rita Polson's case was reclassified as a homicide and set for prosecution. As night fell, Prescott Valley grew quiet, but in the archives, the old metal box remained, no longer forgotten evidence, but the starting point for a legal process reopened after over half a century of waiting. 2 days after his arrest, Edward Polson was brought to an interrogation room at the Prescott Valley Police Department. The small room, lit by cold white light, held a metal table and 2 chairs facing each other. Detective Claire Polson and Task Force investigator David Renshaw were assigned to conduct the formal interrogation. The recorder was activated, time-stamped 9:14 a.m. Edward sat silently, hands clasped, eyes on the table. Claire read his Miranda rights and right to counsel. He nodded, confirming he understood. The first question was simple. "Do you know why you're here?" "Because you think I killed my ex-wife," he replied hoarsely, showing no emotion. She continued, "We don't think. We have evidence." Edward pursed his lips, saying nothing more. The interrogation lasted hours. Initially, he denied any involvement, claiming he was in Flagstaff the night Rita disappeared, sleeping at home and working the next morning as usual. When Claire presented the DNA results from the tire iron, he glanced at them and said, "I used that thing in my shop. Someone could have taken it to her house." Renshaw interjected, "The oil at the scene also matches the formula from your shop." Edward sighed, leaning back, and said slowly, "Machine oils everywhere, that proves nothing." His demeanor was cold, but his hands began to tremble slightly. Claire kept her tone steady, not confrontational, reciting the evidence, ash with human bone, his DNA on the item, a witness seeing light in Rita's basement the night she vanished. "It all points to one thing," she said. "You were the last person with a reason and opportunity to be there." At noon, they took a break. When they resumed, Edward seemed tired, his voice slower. Claire shifted focus, avoiding direct accusations and mentioning the divorce. She opened the court file, pointing to the ruling. Rita Polson received half the assets and ownership of the Silver Creek house. "After this ruling, you lost most of your savings. Were you angry?" "Of course I was," he replied, looking at her for the first time. "She destroyed everything I worked for." That brief sentence shifted the room's atmosphere. Claire didn't interrupt, asking, "On December 5, 1962, did you go to Holbrook?" A long pause followed. Edward looked around, then said, "I don't remember exactly, Maybe I drove somewhere. Renshaw leaned in. Your truck was seen that next morning, being washed at the shop. Were you trying to clean something off? After nearly 4 hours, Edward's voice grew hoarse, his hands clenched. When Claire placed a photo of the Polson house basement, smoke-stained walls, fine black ash, he closed his eyes for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, I didn't mean to kill her, we argued. Claire stayed silent, letting him continue. That night, I went to talk about money. She said she'd sue me again for not paying support. I got angry. She pushed me, and I just grabbed something nearby, hit her once. He bowed his head, voice choked. Rita fell, didn't get up. I panicked. The room fell silent. Claire noted quickly, then asked, What did you do next? Edward exhaled heavily. I didn't know what to do. I thought if no one found her, they'd think she left. He said he dragged her body to the basement, poured machine oil around it, and set it on fire to dispose of it. I thought the fire would burn everything, but the smoke was too thick. I had to put it out. When asked about the remaining body, he paused, then said, It didn't burn completely. I took the rest away. Claire kept her voice calm. Where did you take it? North, past Silver Creek, to some abandoned land where I parked my truck when working roads. I dug a hole, buried it there. She asked him to describe the location precisely. Edward took a blank sheet, trembling as he drew a simple map. A dirt road, a small stream, a large oak tree, and a low patch of land behind it. He marked an X, writing beside it. Here, near White Rock marker. Claire folded the paper, asking one last time. Are you sure this location hasn't changed? He nodded, eyes distant. No one goes there. It's still the same. When the interrogation ended, it was past 8 hours. Claire sealed the recording and signed it. In the official report, Edward's confession was summarized concisely but fully. Subject admitted to striking Rita Polson during an argument, using a metal object. After her death, he poured machine oil to burn part of the body to conceal it. Then buried the remains in abandoned land north of Silver Creek. Subject provided a map of the burial location. The confession, along with the hand-drawn map marked with an X, was placed in a sealed envelope, a thin sheet heavy enough to turn a case buried for over half a century. 3 days after the interrogation, a specialized forensic team was dispatched to Holbrook to excavate the area Edward Polson indicated on his map. The site was about 2 miles north of town, in an abandoned stretch near Silver Creek, with uneven terrain and knee-high wild grass. The dirt road leading in bore faint old tire tracks, surrounded by gnarled oak and willow trees. Claire Polson arrived early, carrying Edward's hand-drawn map. She and the technical team measured the site per his directions. Large oak tree, white rock marker, low ground behind. After over half an hour of searching, they found a light-colored rock protruding from the ground, matching the map's description. About 6 meters away, the ground dipped slightly, covered in dry grass. Claire signaled the forensic team to mark the spot and set up a perimeter to secure the scene. At 8:45 a.m., the excavation began. Under faint sunlight, 3 technicians in protective gear knelt, carefully scraping away layers of soil with trowels and small shovels. The top layer yielded only roots and dry earth, but at about 40 centimeters deep, a patch of darker soil with a distinct odor emerged. The lead forensic expert, Dr. Raymond Cortez, ordered a pause to photograph and record coordinate. Minutes later, as more soil was cleared, a thin bone fragment appeared, curved and small, likely an adult human shin bone. Cortez donned fresh gloves, using a soft brush to clean the area, revealing additional connected bone segments aligned in parallel. Nearby, in the same soil layer, a small metallic object glinted, a scorched button, typical of early 1960s clothing. Not far off, a round object rolled out as dirt was lifted, a worn silver ring, engraved with RP inside. The excavation area was expanded half a meter on each side. Deeper digging uncovered a skull fragment, an intact tooth with root, and a carbonized leather cord. Claire stood nearby, watching the scene unfold with each layer, her face tense. Every item was photographed, its position measured, and sealed in individual bags, numbered SK01 to SK18. The atmosphere was heavy, filled only with the soft scraping of trowels and camera clicks. After 3 hours, the excavation concluded. Over 30 small bone fragments were recovered, including 2 intact long bones, a partial tooth, 4 metal buttons, and 3 personal items, the silver ring, a broken necklace, and a bronze belt buckle fragment. All were placed in a specialized container and sent immediately to the Arizona State Forensics Lab in Phoenix for analysis. 3 days later, preliminary results arrived. The report confirmed the bones belonged to an adult female, aged approximately 35 to 45, consistent with Rita Polson's profile at the time of her disappearance. The shin bone and skull fragment showed signs of severe blunt force trauma, with fractures predating burning. Bone surfaces bore smoke stains and thermal stress, indicating the body was exposed to high heat but not fully incinerated. The tooth's bone marrow retained enough material for DNA extraction. The mitochondrial DNA obtained was sent to the Harrisburg lab, previously used for the ASH DNA to compare. A week later, the results returned. The mitochondrial DNA fully matches the victim Rita Polson's profile. Probability of random match, 1 in 52 million. This final genetic evidence dispelled all doubts. Rita Polson, presumed missing since 1962, had been killed and buried less than 3 miles from her former home. Claire read the report in silence, pausing at the bolded line, "Identification confirmed. Victim Rita Polson." In the Arizona State Forensics conclusion, Dr. Cortez signed cause of death, blunt force trauma, body partially burned then buried. The excavation team produced a detailed site map, marking all bone and item locations with true-scale photos. When the complete report was sent to the prosecutor's office, it was stamped, "Final evidence. Physical confirmation." Claire signed the receipt, placing it alongside the DNA file and Edward's confession. The evidence chain was now complete: testimony, physical items, DNA, crime scene, and remains. In her report to the Attorney General, she wrote, "All forensic data confirms the confession's accuracy. The Rita Polson case is established as a homicide with body disposal. The victim was found at the location described by the suspect. Scientific and field evidence fully align." The next day, the excavation team held a brief press conference in Holbrook. The mood was solemn, with uniformed officials standing beside a board displaying the site's coordinates. Behind them, the newly sealed evidence box bore a red label: "Recovered remains, Polson Rita." After over half a century, the remains of a woman once deemed missing were restored to her true name. Claire watched as the forensic team loaded the box into a vehicle, her mind echoing one thought: she's been found. At the report's end, a bolded line was added as a final affirmation of science and justice: "Case confirmed. Homicide completed." Edward Polson's trial began in early February 2016 at Maricopa County Superior Court, Phoenix. Courtroom 3 was simple but packed. State prosecutors, Arizona Cold Case Initiative investigators, local reporters, and a few Holbrook residents from Rita's era. Claire Polson sat in the witness section, a 300-page case file before her, chronicling the decades-long reinvestigation. As the judge entered, the room stood. After formalities, lead prosecutor Joshua Headcorth presented the formal indictment. Defendant Edward Polson is charged with first-degree murder under Arizona Revised Statutes 13-11-05, related to the death of his ex-wife, Rita Polson, in 1962. The prosecution began by arranging evidence chronologically. First, ash samples from the scene, with Harrisburg's forensic analysis proving human bone presence. Next, mitochondrial DNA matching Rita's sister, confirming the ash as Rita's. The prosecutor displayed visuals on a large screen: calcium phosphorus spectroscopy, burned fabric micrographs, and the report's bolded evidence of homicide confirmed. He then introduced the tire iron, overlooked in 1962, now bearing DNA fully matching Edward Polson. Tested oil samples matched the formula from the defendant's shop. When images of the silver ring, buttons, and bones from the burial site appeared, the courtroom fell silent. The prosecution then played Edward's recorded confession from the September 2015 interrogation. His hoarse, halting voice echoed, "I didn't mean to kill her," we argued. "I hit her once, then burned, buried near Silver Creek." The sound prompted bowed heads. The prosecutor played a short segment, then read the rest aloud, concluding, "All physical evidence and the defendant's confession confirm a lethal attack, followed by burning and burying the body. Rita Polson's death was a direct result of that act." The defense, led by public defender Stanley Reeves, didn't dispute the forensics but requested leniency. He argued the act was unplanned, driven by anger and loss of control, emphasizing Edward's advanced age, poor health, and cooperation during the reinvestigation. The prosecution countered that burning and burying the body showed deliberate concealment, proving intent to avoid detection. The judge asked both sides to discuss applicable charges. After hours of deliberation, the prosecution accepted the defense's proposal for Edward to plead guilty to first-degree manslaughter to expedite proceedings, provided he fully admitted the indictment's contents. The next morning, as the trial resumed, Edward appeared exhausted, hands trembling, an IV mark on his arm. When the judge asked if he wished to amend his plea, he nodded. "Yes, I plead guilty." His hoarse, halting voice was clear enough for the room to hear. The prosecution requested the plea be formally recorded and reread the forensic conclusion. Cause of death: blunt force trauma, body partially burned, then buried. No one spoke further. Claire sat silently, staring ahead, briefly picturing the old Silver Creek house where it all began. Judge Samuel Drayton delivered the final ruling at 10:42 a.m. Based on the confession and undeniable physical evidence, the court finds defendant Edward Polson guilty of first-degree manslaughter, sentenced to 15 years in prison, effective immediately. As the gavel struck, the room remained silent. The prosecutor bowed his head. The defense attorney placed a hand on Edward's shoulder, saying nothing. Edward was let out quietly, his slow steps those of a man drained of strength. Post-trial, the Arizona prosecutor's office issued a brief press release. After 53 years, the Rita Polson case, missing from Holbrook in 1962, has been resolved. DNA evidence and confessions led to an effective conviction. The Arizona Cold Case Initiative continues to expand investigations into unresolved cases. In the archives, File SC-1262 was moved to closed, conviction achieved. Claire signed the final confirmation. Leaving the courthouse, she felt no triumph, only closure, a circle of justice completed after over half a century, through bones, ash, and cold numbers. Sufficient to restore a name to its rightful place: Rita Polson, 1922-1962. After the verdict took effect, the Rita Polson case file was returned to Navajo County's archives for final status update. On the electronic file's cover, a new line appeared: Case status: homicide, solved. Under legal notes, the system logged the closure date, lead investigator's name, and DNA evidence access code. The SC-1262 evidence box, once dust-covered for half a century, was placed in a dedicated glass case in the Arizona State Forensics Bureau's preservation area, a testament to long-term evidence retention. The Bureau's December 2016 summary report began, "No case is truly closed if evidence endures." Sent to all state police departments, it recommended reviewing over 2,000 unresolved pre-1980 cases with preserved evidence. The report's analysis emphasized that the near-perfect preservation of ash and metal evidence rebuilt the evidence chain, from DNA to oil compounds, physics to chemistry, forming a seamless link between past and present. The Arizona Forensics Bureau dubbed this the Polson case, a model for forensic technology in cold cases and a basis for expanding preservation program budgets. Part of the report quoted Detective Claire Polson from the final meeting: "Old evidence doesn't lie. It waits to be heard in the language of science." In Holbrook, news of the trial's outcome and Rita Polson's identification spread. Local media published reflective articles calling it the case that returned from ash. On the town's main avenue, residents discussed how a half-century mystery was resolved. Many former neighbors were shocked to learn the perpetrator was Edward Polson, remembered as a quiet, reserved mechanic. Still, most felt relief at the resolution. Some elderly residents placed wildflowers at the Silver Creek site where the remains were found, honoring a woman forgotten too long. The county held a brief ceremony to commend the Cold Case Initiative team and Harrisburg Forensics for their pivotal contributions. In his speech, the State Investigation Bureau director stated, "The Polson case shows justice may come late, but never vanishes." The Arizona Justice Institute's final report cited it as a model for cross-decade evidence preservation and analysis taught in state forensic training courses. For Claire Polson, closing the case was more than professional. In her final report's internal notes, she wrote, "I finished what the previous generation couldn't. Aunt Rita is no longer missing." The note was saved in the electronic file beside a photo of the resealed SC-1262 box. After months of work, she returned to Holbrook, stopping at the old site. The house was gone, leaving only cracked concrete and a broken fence post. She stood silently, thinking of Briggs, Nash, and those who sought answers within their era's limits. The case's impact reached beyond Navajo County. The following year, Arizona established the Polson Evidence Trust, a fund for preserving and reanalyzing old samples with DNA potential. The Phoenix Herald published a 4-page article titled "From Dust to Justice: The Rita Polson Case and the Science of Time," detailing the journey from a dusty box to the final trial, calling it a triumph of persistence and precision. For Holbrook's community, the Polson case became a reminder that justice, though delayed, remains effective. The small town, which witnessed a fireplace's light go out in 1962, became known as the starting point for restoring faith in investigations. The 2017 Cold Case Initiative report's final summary read, "Polson case solved after 53 years. Science prevailed." In the archives, among hundreds of metal case files, box SC-1262 remained, now bearing a new small label in italicized print, "Rita Polson. Found, 2015. Justice served, 2016. The Rita Polson case is not just a half-century legal journey, but a profound reflection of enduring values in today's American society. Justice may come late, but it doesn't vanish if people believe in truth. That a dust-covered box, South Carolina 1262, became the key to reopening the case reminds us that in an era of data and technology, it's not just speed, but the ability to preserve and respect evidence, information, and memory that matters. Detective Claire Polson's persistence as a new generation niece reflects personal responsibility and faith in the legal system, two elements shaping contemporary American identity. In a nation where trust in justice is sometimes tested by division and skepticism, this story underscores that technological advancements or legal reforms mean little without human integrity, professional ethics, and courage to face the past. It also offers a reminder to every American today: don't deem mistakes or unresolved stories hopeless. Like the Polson case, any injustice, though buried by time, can be illuminated if someone is brave enough to seek it. In modern life, where information can be quickly forgotten, protecting truth, preserving evidence, respecting data, and honoring history is not just the work of police or courts, but every American's responsibility to their community, ensuring no other Rita Polson vanishes in time's silence. Thank you for following the journey to restore justice for Rita Polson, a case thought buried in the past, but ultimately illuminated by truth's light. Please subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring more cold case stories where justice still awaits its name. See you in the next video.